Hey students, today we are going to be studying chapter number 19, Reproduction in Plants. Today's video, we are going to be covering the introduction, which is the first page of your chapter. We have 2 paragraphs for the introduction. Now, in these 2 paragraphs, we are going to be learning 3 important things. We are going to be learning 3 important things in this paragraph. The first important thing in this paragraph is we're going to learn what reproduction is. We're going to learn what is reproduction, or we're going to learn the definition of reproduction. Why? Because as you can see, the chapter here is reproduction in plants, and obviously we need to know reproduction, right? So we're going to learn the definition of reproduction. Then we're going to learn why is reproduction necessary, or why do we need reproduction. And finally, we're going to learn how is reproduction varying, or how is reproduction done. So the first thing we are going to learn is what is reproduction. Now if you look at your textbook, the reproduction has 2 different definitions. The first definition is it is the production of one's own kind. It is the production of one's own kind. What does that mean? It means if a species, for example, we have elephant. If an elephant gives rise to another small tiny elephant or a kid, then that process is called reproduction. So reproduction basically means when a species give birth to its kids, okay, that process is called reproduction. This is just a small idea. This is not the definition. This is just a small idea. But here we have the definition. What is the definition? The process by which living organisms produce their offspring for the continuity of species is called reproduction. The process by which living organisms produce their offsprings. What does offsprings mean? Kids, right? For the continuity of species, so that the species can continue, is called reproduction. So if anybody asks you what is reproduction, then what you're going to say? The process by which living organisms produce their offspring for the continuity of species is called reproduction. You can write that point down under the heading reproduction. You can write this point as the definition. Now we understood what reproduction is. Now, since we understood what reproduction is, we need to understand why is reproduction necessary. So the first thing we need to know that is reproduction is the most important characteristic of all living organisms. Every living organism, if they want to continue, they need reproduction. For many reasons, they need reproduction. It is the most important characteristic for an organism, for a living organism. Okay, so that is one point. Why is reproduction necessary? Now that is just the top understanding, the overview. But there are 2 important points on why reproduction is necessary. There are 2 different points on why reproduction is necessary. The first point being that reproduction is necessary for the continuation of the species on earth. So if a species want to continue living on earth, if they need to continue living on earth, then they need to reproduce. Obviously, because organisms die, right? Species die. So example, if a grandfather elephant dies, then the population of the elephant is less. So in order to keep the population or to continue the species in the earth, then reproduction is necessary. The second point I already explained, but I'm going to say it, is to replace the dead members. Obviously, to keep the population the same, you need to reproduce, right? So first one is for the continuation of species, and second point is to replace the dead members. First one is for the continuation of species, and the second one is to replace the dead members. Now we understood why is reproduction necessary. Now we need to understand how does reproduction vary. How does reproduction vary? Now, reproduction varies according to two different ways. Reproduction, it varies according to two different ways. The first way it varies is according to how reproduction is different according to, the first way is individual species. Individual species. And the individual species. So what does individual species means? Different type of species means different type of organisms. They reproduce in a different way. So for example, elephant, they reproduce sexually. Plants, they might reproduce asexually, or they may reproduce sexually. It varies according to the organism. So the first way mode of reproduction varies is according to the individual species. The second way mode of reproduction varies is available conditions. The second way the species varies is according to available conditions. What does that mean? Some species, they reproduce asexually during some certain time, and some species they produce sexually during available condition. It depends on the environment. So what are the two things reproduction depends on? The first thing is that it depends on the individual species, the way the species reproduces, and the second way is it depends on the available condition. So now we learned how does reproduction vary. There we conclude all our 3 points. But there is one more thing that we need to know. Okay, it does not go under any heading, but it is necessary that we know that even though we have these many variation on how organisms reproduce, one thing is passed down to every generation. Even though some organisms produce sexually, some produce asexually, some produce in different way, one thing is passed down to all the generation, and that is hereditary material. Irrespective of the mode of reproduction, hereditary material is always passed down, be it sexually or asexually. If a plant produces sexually or asexually, it will always give its hereditary material to its offspring being its children. So now let's quickly recap what we learned in a quick summary. Okay, what we learned is that reproduction is reproduction definition. We learned what is reproduction. It is the process by which living organisms produce their offsprings for the continuity of species is called reproduction. And we also learned why is reproduction necessary. We learned that reproduction is necessary for the continuation of the species, on earth, and also to replace the dead members. Then we also learned that how does reproduction varies. There are two ways reproduction varies. The mode of reproduction vary according to individual species and available condition. And in the final thing we learned is, irrespective of the variation of the mode of reproduction, hereditary material is passed to their offsprings during the process of reproduction. These are the 4 important points that we can take away from the introduction. I said we have 3 parts, 3 important things, but the 4th point is also important. So this concludes our introduction.